My earliest memories are filled with the warmth of my father's smile and the comfort of our small rented apartment. I'm Vanessa, and until I was 13, my life was nothing but ordinary in the best sense of the word. My father James was that rare man who turned the mundane into an adventure. Although we lived in a modest apartment, he made it special. He turned a tiny balcony into a fabulous garden where fragrant geraniums and lush fuchsias bloomed, and our living room into an improvised fort that saved us from imaginary storms on rainy weekends. Mom, on the other hand, was completely different. Sarah dreamed of more, a house where there would be a place for a chic living room, a spacious kitchen and a dressing room that could be filled with silk dresses and fur coats. She always seemed a little reserved, even cold, especially compared to Dad's infectious enthusiasm. But their differences only seemed to complement each other, like two pieces of a mosaic perfectly converging in the picture of our lives. "Vanessa, honey, would you like to spend the weekend with Grandpa?" my mother often asked. I always agreed, but not because I didn't like being at home. My grandfather's house was something magical for me. This two-story Victorian mansion with creaky wooden floors and cozy play areas seemed like an abode full of secrets. "Your mom needs some time with your dad," Grandpa Richard explained with a smile full of understanding as he opened the door for me. "And I need time with my beloved granddaughter." I was a receptive child, perhaps more mature than it seemed to adults. I understood that Mom needed space, and Dad needed her love. These moments with my grandfather never caused me feelings of resentment. On the contrary, I felt like an adult, wise beyond my years. Grandpa told me about Dad's childhood, taught me how to count money and explained how important small joys are in life. A former bank manager, he still maintained discipline, but he knew how to cook the most delicious pancakes in the world. "You know, Vanessa," he said one day over breakfast on his old porch, "your mom dreams of a house like this. But you know what's even more important? A house filled with love." I nodded. Even at such a young age, I understood that our small apartment could be cramped, but it was always filled with this bright, warming feeling. Every time Dad came home, he hugged me, threw me in the air and showered Mom with kisses until she started laughing. These moments filled our tiny lives with a sense of infinity. But life tends to change when you least expect it. I was 13 when Dad started losing weight rapidly. At first, he joked that he had finally lost weight, but his eyes betrayed concern. Visits to the doctors became frequent, and my mother increasingly looked worried. "It's just a phase," he said, ruffling my hair. "I'll be the same again soon." But it wasn't just a phase. Aggressive pancreatic cancer consumed him like wildfire. In just a few months, my strong, energetic father turned into a shadow of himself. I watched helplessly as Mom desperately tried to keep us together, but I could see her crumbling inside. The last conversation with Dad has remained in my memory forever. He was lying in a hospital bed, his skin was pale, and his hand could barely hold mine. "Take care of your mother, Princess," he whispered. "And obey your grandfather. He is wiser than all of us." After his death, our lives changed forever. Mom withdrew into herself, immersed in her own world full of regrets and bitterness. Grandfather became our support, and his house became a haven where I could hide from grief. We spent long evenings playing chess and talking about how important it is to appreciate the present moments, because tomorrow is just an illusion that we cannot control. The year after Dad's death was like an endless gray fog, thick and suffocating. The seasons changed each other, but neither the spring sun nor the winter snow could break through the veil of pain that settled in our house. Mom practically disappeared from my life. Her figure appeared on the threshold of her grandfather's house only occasionally, as a polite reminder that she still exists. But these rare visits only increased the feeling of loneliness. Her gaze slid over me as if I were a stranger, and her words were formal, like a person performing someone else's duty. Grandpa Richard was my salvation. His house, with its creaking floors and the smell of old books, gradually took on the significance of my only refuge. Every morning I woke up in the room where my father used to grow up. His framed photographs on the nightstand, school awards neatly arranged on the shelves, and an old soccer ball at the foot of the bed were mute witnesses to his youth. These things became close to me, as if they could fill the void left by his passing. My grandfather did everything to support me. He helped with my lessons, patiently explained math problems, made hot chocolate and read books to me at night when I couldn't sleep. But despite his efforts, his tired look and the deep wrinkles on his face betrayed how much he was suffering from the whole situation. He didn't tell me about it directly, but I could feel it, see it in the way his shoulders hunched a little more every day. One day, Mom showed up at Grandpa's doorstep on a Saturday morning. I heard the click of her heels long before she came in. When I saw her, I barely recognized this woman. Instead of the somber black robe that became her permanent uniform after Dad's death, she was wearing a bright yellow dress. Her face, once tarnished, now shone with a new kind of life, but it was not the happiness that warms, but a cold shine that warms. "Vanessa, honey, pack your things. You're coming home," she announced happily, as if this was the happiest day of her life. Grandpa, who was standing next to me, looked as dumbfounded as I was. We looked at each other in silence, but I obeyed, gathering myself in a matter of minutes. On the way, Mom chatted incessantly. Her words flowed like a river, but they didn't have a drop of the warmth I remembered. It seemed to me that a completely different woman was sitting in the car, a stranger, although her voice sounded so familiar. When we reached the door of our apartment, I held my breath for a moment. But what I saw inside was even more unexpected. There were two people standing in our tiny living room, a tall man with thick gray hair and a young girl who looked about 3 years younger than me. They were both smiling tightly, as if they felt out of place. "Vanessa, meet Robert and his daughter Emma," Mom said with such joy, as if she was announcing some amazing gift. "Robert is my fiancé, and Emma is your new sister. We're getting married soon." Her voice rang and her heels clicked merrily on the floor as she walked over to Robert and took his hand. The room spun before my eyes. I gasped, but couldn't say another word. Mom waved her hand as if everything was completely natural. "Oh, we've been dating for a while now," she said with a slight nonchalance. "I didn't tell you because I knew that people can be jealous or judgmental. It was better for everyone." Barely holding back tears, I ran to my old room, which had also changed. The walls were repainted in light gray. There was a new set instead of my furniture, and everything reminded me that this place no longer belongs to me. I took out my phone and dialed Grandpa's number. He answered instantly. "Mom is getting married," I whispered into the phone, barely holding back the tremor in my voice. "And she didn't even tell me." Grandpa arrived 20 minutes later. I heard his footsteps and a quiet conversation with my mother from my room. He spoke with restraint, but his voice was full of resentment. "Sarah, how could you not tell anyone? How could you not tell Vanessa?" "Dad, I'm happy," Mom replied, her voice sounding defensive. "For the first time in so long, I can breathe. I've started a new life." "James wouldn't want you to be unhappy," Grandpa said after a long pause. "But he wouldn't want that either. Sarah, don't forget that you have a daughter who needs you." The 3 months leading up to the wedding were filled with a strange, oppressive feeling, as if I was in someone else's life. Our small apartment, which had seemed cramped before, now turned into a box where 4 people had to share air, space, and every moment. But it wasn't the crowding that was the hardest test. The most painful thing turned out to be watching how my mother, my once caring and understanding mother, seemed to disappear into the new role of Emma's mother. Emma, my new stepsister, skillfully manipulated my mother. Her voice, gently dragging out the word "mom," made my heart clench. She pronounced the word so easily, as if it had always belonged to her. "Mom, can you help me with my hair?" Emma appeared with such a request almost daily. Mom didn't hesitate to drop everything, even our conversation, in order to fulfill her request. Even Emma's very intonation annoyed me. It wasn't the call of a child, it was a statement of rights to something that, as it seemed to me, had always been mine. Mom didn't seem to notice anything except Emma. When Emma mentioned that she wanted to study ballet, her mother immediately enrolled her in private lessons. I remembered how I begged for the same thing a few years ago, but then I heard in response that it was better to spend the money on something more important. When Emma complained that her old phone was running too slow, her mom bought her a brand new iPhone, the latest, most expensive one. And when Emma wanted to decorate her part of the bedroom that we now shared, Mom didn't hesitate to spend hundreds of dollars on new bed linen, curtains, and decor. Every time I tried to point out the obvious difference in her approach to Emma and me, Mom just shook her head. "Your sister should feel welcome here," she said, as if she didn't notice that I didn't feel like a part of her life anymore. The wedding day was quiet, but every little thing on that day screamed about changes that I didn't like. We were standing in a small room of a local restaurant. Mom looked incredibly happy. Her face was glowing. I was standing next to her, dressed in a bridesmaid's dress, but I hardly felt like I was a part of what was happening. Mom followed Emma everywhere, straightened her hair, admired her appearance, as if Emma was the star of the celebration. On the contrary, I felt invisible. During the reception, I noticed how my grandfather handed my mother a check for $5,000. It was a generous gift, but I unwittingly witnessed their subsequent conversation. Hiding behind the door, I heard my mother, drunk on champagne and, it seems, her own determination, hiss to my grandfather, "Really, Dad? A receipt? I was counting on you to give us your house. We're a real family now, we need more space. The apartment is too small." Grandpa remained calm, but his voice was full of disappointment. "Sarah, you're rushing things. A sudden engagement, now this house. This is not just a property that can be transferred on a whim. Besides, this is where Vanessa spends half her time." "Oh, is that so? Are you playing favorites now?" Mom almost screamed. "No, Sarah, I'm just being practical." "And maybe you should be the same," Grandpa replied. This conversation, filled with tension and pain, did not leave my mind. My mother seemed to have become a stranger. She built a new ideal in her head, Emma as a star child, Robert as a reliable husband. There was no place for me in this new family. I spent more and more time at my grandfather's, where I could feel like myself. His house remained for me an island of stability and solace. It was there that I could escape the feeling of being replaced. The years flew by, and now I was on the verge of graduating from high school. With a prom dress in my wardrobe and an invitation in my hands, I realized that I was on the verge of a new chapter in my life. But instead of joy, I was filled with a feeling of emptiness. I did not know what lay ahead, but I understood one thing: my place in the new reality of Mom and Emma was no more. Life in the apartment after that dinner turned into thin ice, on which I had to walk, trying not to fall into the abyss of new conflicts. I realized that it is better to be inconspicuous, to take up as little space and time as possible. I spent most of my days in my room, immersed in books and dreams about the future, or I ran to my grandfather, where, at least, I felt protected and needed. At our weekly family dinners with my grandfather, I was still trying to maintain the illusion of normality, despite the fact that Mom, Robert, and Emma were clearly playing their own reality built for them. At one of these dinners, I decided to tell you about an important event in my life. I was accepted to a state university. Smiling modestly, I shared that I had chosen the specialty, finance and business management, and I hoped to build a successful career. The silence that followed was so intense that it seemed physically palpable. Mom put down her fork, exchanged a glance with Robert and, as if clearing her throat, said, "Actually, Vanessa, Robert and I have been discussing this. Perhaps it would be better if you started working immediately after graduation. College, you know, is not so necessary for everyone." I looked at her in disbelief. But Dad set up a foundation for my college before he died, I said, trying to keep my voice even. He always wanted me to get a college degree. Mom awkwardly adjusted the napkin on her lap, avoiding my gaze. Robert and I thought it would be better to save this money for Emma's education. She's incredibly talented, Vanessa. The best in its class. These funds will help her enroll in a prestigious university, where she will be able to reach her full potential. Robert nodded affirmatively, as if it had already been decided. Everything was boiling inside me. Dad left this money for me. I could barely contain the tremor in my voice. This is his last gift. You can't just pick them up and give them to Emma. Mom looked hurt. Don't be selfish, Vanessa. Emma is your sister. Stepsister, I replied sharply. And this money is the last thing I have left of Dad. You've already given her everything, my room, my attention, my love. But I won't let you take it away. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't see sincerity in them, just manipulation. After all we've done for you. Emma needs it more than you do. But what about what I need? What about what Dad wanted for me? My words sounded like a thunderclap, ending the conversation. I abruptly stood up, knocking over a chair, and went into my room, leaving the door slamming behind me. Tears stung his eyes, but not from weakness, from rage and resentment. After that night, the apartment became even colder. My mother and I hardly spoke. Robert openly ignored me, and Emma sent me contemptuous grins as she passed by. An atmosphere of tension dominated every moment of my life. When the day of my graduation came, I was not surprised to see neither my mother, Robert, nor Emma in the hall. Only Grandpa, sitting in the front row, applauded so loudly that his joy seemed capable of filling the entire hall. His proud smile meant more to me than anything my new family could offer. I was packing that night. Just 3 cardboard boxes and an old suitcase were all I had. My grandfather helped me carefully pack my books and clothes into the car. His silent presence filled me with a sense of security. When everything was ready, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your room will always be ready for you, Vanessa. Always has been, always will be." We drove away, and I didn't look back. There was nothing left behind the apartment door that connected me to this place. University was a new beginning for me, but not an escape. Instead of just forgetting the past, I decided to use it as motivation to build a life for myself in which I would appreciate every opportunity created by my efforts and the memory of who my father was. I sat in my room that night after the funeral, surrounded by a silence that seemed tangible, like a blanket enveloping me. Every detail of the day replayed in my head over and over again. I remembered my mother's weak voice, her cold announcement of my grandfather's death, and how she appeared at the service so late, with such ostentatious, almost theatrical grief. I couldn't help feeling that this day was just another scene for her, where she was playing a role, and not a real farewell to a man who, despite all the differences, loved her unconditionally. But even that couldn't distract me from the emptiness inside. Grandpa was gone. The only person who was my real home, who supported me, loved me, saw value in me. A few weeks before his death, I was at his house. We were sitting in the kitchen, drinking tea as usual. I told him about my corporate finance course, and he listened with a smile that always made me feel like I was saying something important. "You know, Vanessa, I'm proud of you," he said when I finished. "You're stronger than you think. You're creating your future, and you're doing it with such dignity. This is a rare quality." These words were the last gift for me. Now, sitting in the room, I realized that I had to live so that he could be proud of me, even if he was no longer there. I knew I couldn't let my mom and her family take away my grandfather's memory or what he gave me. After the funeral, another life began. I returned to the university, but something inside me has changed. Every day I felt my grandfather standing invisibly by my side, reminding me that I could overcome anything. But at the same time, there was a sense of responsibility, almost a duty. I knew I had to finish what I started. I graduated from the university with honors, getting the degree my father wanted so much for me, and thanks to my grandfather, who always supported me. At the graduation ceremony, I held a pendant with his photo on my chest. At that moment, I realized that all this was not only for my sake, but also for the sake of those who believed in me when I lacked confidence myself. After graduation, I got a job at an investment firm, and despite all the novelty and pressure, I felt confident. I was in my place. But even at that time, I did not forget about my grandfather's house. His house was sold. My mother disposed of it just a few weeks after his death, hardly thinking about what it meant to me. But I was thinking more and more about getting him back. To return it not just as a place, but as a symbol of the love and stability that it represented. One evening, almost a year after my grandfather's death, I unexpectedly received a letter. It was an official envelope from a law firm. When I opened it, I found a document stating that my grandfather had left me his bank account as a legacy. It wasn't the kind of money that could change the world, but it was enough to change my life. I decided that I would use them to buy his house. It will be my way to preserve what he meant to me, to preserve his legacy. And maybe this will be the beginning of something new, a life that I can build with my own hands, inspired by his faith in me. I sat across from them, feeling a wave of irritation rise in my chest. They behaved as if this office was their private living room, and grandfather's testamentary process was a formality that did not deserve my presence. Mom gave me a cold look, her lips pressed into a thin line, as if my very appearance had disrupted her plans. "I'm here because I was invited," I replied, trying to keep my voice even, although everything was boiling inside me. "And as far as I know, grandfather wanted me to be present." Mom leaned back in her chair with a feigned indifference, but I noticed her fingers nervously clenching on the armrest. Robert didn't even look up from the phone, and Emma, who was sitting with an exaggerated look of boredom, rolled her eyes. Mr. Anderson, the notary I already knew, came through the door. His serious face and severe suit gave him the look of a man who does not tolerate drama. He sat down at his desk and carefully spread out several folders in front of him. "Thank you for coming," he began, looking around the room. "Today we will announce Richard Hartford's will. I ask you to listen carefully to everything that will be said in order to avoid further misunderstandings." I saw my mother straighten up in her chair, and her eyes sparkled with impatience. She was sure that the house, like everything else, would go to her. Robert and Emma looked like they didn't care much about it, but I knew they were here for a reason. Mr. Anderson began to read. In his will, Richard Hartford expressed a desire that his estate be distributed as follows. He paused, looked at us, and I felt my heart beat faster. "My daughter, Sarah, receives an amount of $10,000 in cash to use as she sees fit." I noticed Mom's face tense up. It wasn't the amount she expected to hear. But Mr. Anderson continued. "I bequeath my house on Winchester Street and all its contents to my granddaughter, Vanessa Hartford." These words sounded like a thunderclap. I froze in disbelief. Mom turned to me abruptly, her face turned pale, and her eyes lit up with anger. "What? This is some kind of mistake," she blurted out, jumping up from her chair. "This house is mine. I'm his daughter. He couldn't leave it to her." Mr. Anderson remained unperturbed. "Miss Hartford, I'm just reading the will. If you have any objections, you can go to court. However, according to the legal documents, your father wanted the house to belong to Vanessa." Mom slumped into a chair, but her anger was obvious. "It's not fair. She didn't do anything to deserve it. Did you?" I blurted out sharply. My voice was shaking, but I looked her straight in the eye. "You kicked me out of my grandfather's house without even giving me a chance to say goodbye to him. You have arranged your life without caring at all about his wishes. And now you dare to blame me?" Mom didn't answer. She just turned away, her shoulders shaking as if she was trying to hold back tears. Robert and Emma sat as if they were ready to disappear. After completing the procedure, Mr. Anderson handed me the keys to the house. They were cold to the touch, but for me it was a symbol of something more: justice, memory, and the love that my grandfather always gave me. When I left the office, I felt free. The house was mine again, and now it wasn't just real estate. It was a place where I could start over, on my own terms. Sitting on the porch, I watched the sun slowly sink below the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of gold and paint. The house that now belonged to me was quiet again, almost empty. I felt this silence with my whole being, like deep breathing after a long period of anxiety. In front of me, the bags with my mother's, Robert's, and Emma's belongings are neatly laid out. The symmetry of the situation was almost poetic, their belongings, thrown away like mine once were. The only difference was that I didn't do it with cruelty, but only returned what they left me. The bags were on the porch, and with them years of bitterness, pain, and betrayal. It was a symbol that I was regaining not only my home, but also my dignity, my right to be part of my grandfather's legacy, which he passed on to me with love and trust. The car arrived soon. Mom, Robert, and Emma came out, their faces tense. Mom got out of the car first, a mixture of resentment and a pleading expression on her face. Robert was acting calm, but I noticed his gaze darting from the house to the bags, as if he was trying to figure out how far this had gone. Emma pointedly did not look at me. Her face expressed everything she thought about the situation: teenage arrogance and anger. Mom came closer, stopping at the bottom of the porch step. She looked at me and then at the bags at her feet. "You shouldn't have done that, Vanessa." Her voice was low, almost pleading. "We are your family." I got up slowly, holding the house keys in my hand. Their cold metal seemed to add to my confidence. "Family?" I repeated, looking her straight in the eye. "Do you call this a family? After you kicked me out of my grandfather's house, threw my stuff on the lawn, stole my college fund, do you have the audacity to talk about family?" Her face turned pale and her lips trembled, but I didn't give her time to answer. "My family is my grandfather. This is my father. These are people who loved me, not used me. And this place, this house, is now my home. And I won't let you come in here again." Robert stepped forward, his voice harsh. "Vanessa, stop making a drama. We've already discussed everything. It was your decision." I turned to him, looking coldly into his eyes. "My decision? Do you seriously think I should apologize for defending what is rightfully mine? You've already done enough, and now it's over." Emma muttered something, but I didn't even turn my head. I walked over to the bags stacked on the porch and pointed at them. "That's all you need. Take them and leave. And don't come back." Mom tried again. "Vanessa, please. We can't live in a car. Emma needs to go to school. Robert needs a place to work." Her words came back at me like an attempt at manipulation, but this time I was ready. "You could always find a solution if you wanted to. But you chose the easiest way, to take what belongs to me. Now it's over. You had a chance, but you destroyed it yourself." They silently packed up their belongings and loaded them into the trunk of the car. Mom looked back at me one last time, but I didn't look away. There were tears in her eyes, but I didn't let those tears fool me anymore. When the car disappeared around the bend, I took a deep breath. The sun sank completely below the horizon, leaving behind a gentle glow that was reflected in the windows of the house. I turned to the door, inserted a new key into the lock, and slowly opened it. Inside, everything was as I had left it. Every detail reminded me of my grandfather: his armchair by the window, the smell of his favorite tea, books lined up on the shelves, as if waiting to be picked up again. I sat down on the sofa and looked at the room. It wasn't just a house. It was a place where I felt safe, where I could start building my life from scratch. I knew there were many difficulties ahead, but now I was ready to face them. I remember the moment when Mom, Robert, and Emma finally left. The car slowly disappeared around the corner, and the silence of the house enveloped me. It was a feeling of victory, mixed with a heavy realization. I had just completely broken up with the people I once considered my family. But there was no pain inside, just a strange relief, as if the weight of their expectations, their manipulations, their disappointments no longer lay on my shoulders. I was free. These 6 months were the time when I started to rebuild myself. My grandfather's house no longer seemed to me just a refuge, it became a symbol of my new beginning. After my first night's sleep in my grandfather's bedroom, I woke up with a new sense of determination. I found a letter on the kitchen table, neatly left under a teacup. My grandfather's handwriting, which I would have recognized among thousands of others, immediately touched me to the depths of my soul. My dear Vanessa, if you are reading this letter, it means that I have already left, and you have just gone through what I know was a difficult ordeal. I'm sorry I left you alone with this, but I've always believed in your strength. You inherited your father's honesty and my business sense, and I know you can handle it. This house and everything in it is yours, but most importantly, don't forget to keep those family photos that I left in the attic. Some memories are worth keeping, even if they involve pain. They remind us of who we are and who we can become. I'm proud of you, Vanessa. Take care of yourself, dear. With love, Grandpa. I've read this letter dozens of times. It became an anchor for me, a reminder that I am not alone. Grandfather left me not only the house, but also his trust, his faith in me. I promised myself that I would do everything he asked. The attic was the first place I went. Among the old boxes I found family albums, faded letters, photographs in which my mother was still smiling, and my father looked at her with adoration. These moments seemed like memories from another life, but I realized that they were part of my story. The house was soon filled with new life. I decided that renting it out would help me save money for the dreams I had been building for years. The young family that moved here turned out to be wonderful. Their children ran around the yard where my grandfather once taught me to play ball, and their laughter echoed through the house as a reminder that life goes on. I focused on my studies. The last semester at the university was another step forward for me. I graduated with honors, proud that I fulfilled my dad's dream. The diploma seemed to symbolize the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Mom, Robert, and Emma have been trying to contact me. The first calls were full of feigned politeness, requests for a meeting to discuss important issues. Later they became more desperate, especially from Mom. She mentioned the difficulties with money, how Emma needed help. But I didn't answer. I understood that this was another round of manipulation, which I refused. This chapter of my life was closed. Sometimes I heard that they had found a new apartment, that their life had somehow improved. I felt neither anger nor hatred towards them. Only cold indifference. They were no longer a part of my life, and that was the right thing to do. Family is not those who betray you, but those who help you become a better person. For me, my grandfather and father will remain my real family. Now I am on the threshold of a new chapter in my life. My dreams, my plans, all this is now in my hands. Grandfather's house will remain for me not only a place where I found peace, but also a symbol that I can go through any storm and come out stronger.